we are closer to home, we are closer to Presidency University. Sharon.
Mr. Chairman, this motion is essentially about one question and one question only. Can we isolate education from one of the most important processes which has been responsible for the evolution of humankind since the dawn of civilization? And when we answer that question, we are basically cracking or deciphering today's motion. And when I think of today's motion, I am taken back to a famous graffiti in college, which reads something like this: when politics determines our education, we must determine our politics. And when I'm talking about such a graffiti, I'm reminded of a conversation between Marx and Engels, where Engels interestingly says that what is politics? Politics is a theater. It is a theater where the battle of ideas is fought. And Marx says that the ruling class, the class which controls the material means of production, also controls the mental means of production. Ladies and gentlemen, I hail from a country where 15 to 16% only of the youth in the age bracket 17 to 23 have access to any sort of education. Ladies and gentlemen, I also hail from a country where the constitution of our country at the time of enforcement in the year 1950 says that within 10 years, every child up to the age of 14 must get free and compulsory education. 65 years since the enforcement of the Constitution, this clause was first based as a directive principle of state policy. Now it's moved on to a fundamental right. This clause has not yet been converted to a reality. And why is that? Because for 65 years, the central government and the various state governments in this country have not yet been able to come to a consensus about sharing the financial burden to make universal child education a reality. And yes, here we have Mr. Manishankar Iyer actually talking about policy making and politicization, where I would like to say that yes, we're actually going into policy making, but actually this policy making is politicization in the garb of policy making, and there's a massive difference between the two. Since Mr. Manishankar Iyer is also here, I would like to quote Jawaharlal Nehru when he said at Allahabad University in the year 1950 that when we consider the question of education, we have to think in terms of the state and society we are aiming at. We have to train our people to that end, and we have to decide what sort of citizens do we want in our country. Mr. Jawaharlal Nehru says that politics and education will have to not only be linked at the level of state and society, politics will also determine, or the state will also determine, what sort of education do people receive in this country, and what is the ideal citizen, what direction do the people of this country actually want. And ironically, I'm living in a country which has recently signed a 98,000 crore deal to build a bullet train between Bombay and Ahmedabad. But we are actually politically unwilling to spend that 98,000 crores on actually educating the youth of our country to make sure that that bullet train is endogenously developed in our country and exported outside. Why? Because probably a track for a bullet train can be built and showcased in 2019, but education for a generation cannot. And that is the sad irony of today's country, of today's 21st century India. When we actually talk of politicization of education, and we have an opposition which actually wants to live in denial. Yes, we can live in denial. We can live in denial when vice chancellors of universities are politically branded for actually getting funds in a cash-strapped university. We can actually live in denial when teachers are beaten up and abused in public forum for supposedly political leanings. Yes, we can live in denial when my friends right now, as I speak, are at the UGC headquarters in Delhi protesting against non-net scholarships. And wait, they're going to come back to the university in January and then they're going to say, we fought for you, now vote for us. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the sort of politicization that we are talking about. We are living in a state of denial in a country where the president or the leader of a nationalist organization stands 2 weeks back with a vice chancellor and the registrar of the university and says that, look, Westernization of education has not really helped in nationalism, so let's actually scrap off English education altogether. We're actually living in the sort of a country where the chairman of the Indian Council of Historical Research is going to come up in public forum and say, I favor the caste system, and I also favor the fact, and I believe in the fact, that the Ramayana and Mahabharata are not pieces of mythology, but pieces of history. Please note, ladies and gentlemen, not pieces of mythology, but pieces of history. The chairman of the ICHR actually making a statement using his office. The only way that the opposition today can win is by saying that, look, it's not inevitable. This inevitability has come, it's stayed, and it's gone. So if I have to go by the semantics of this motion, yes, probably. But let me quote Swami Vivekananda here by saying, and this is almost 150 years back when he wrote a letter to his disciple, by saying that the chief cause of India's ruin has been the monopolization of education. Please note, the monopolization of education by a dint of pride and royal authority concentrated in a few hands. This was 150 years back. This probably holds true even today.
I don't think very often in her long, illustrious career that the Vice Chancellor had to defend against her own student. And for this opportunity, rather unique, Madame Anuradha Lohia, Vice Chancellor of Presidency University.
Kunal, you're wrong. I have to defend against my students every single minute of my job. To begin, as Indians, we love politics. We live politics, we breathe politics. You take any mainstream newspaper, the front page is full of essentially political stuff. The bread and butter stuff like economics comes on the 6th page. We live in a constant state of political excitation, and in such a scenario, which sector of our lives is going to be immune to politics? Is education immune to politics? I dare say it is not inevitable that we are going to be ruled by politics. However, the fact that education could have been or has been politicized in a certain country or region for some time should not mean it is inevitable and fait accompli in a broader or more general sense. Politicization of education, let's define the several strands. A, writing of textbooks with a certain political ideology on slant which depends upon which political party is in power. Number 2, the practice of student politics on our campuses. Number 3, interference by a political establishment in the affairs of the educational institution. Number 4, the politics of caste, community, and gender, which dictates which education will be available to a individual. If politics was so inevitable in education, why is it that some countries, some regions, and again some institutions are politicized while the rest are not? Why is it, for example, that during the Naxalite movement in the late 60s, some reputed higher education institutions came to be known as nurseries and cradles for politics? Why is it that the Berkeley campus spawns expression of political activism, but not the neighboring University of California at San Francisco? Could it be that some places and institutions are more prone to politicization than others? Why is it, for instance, that student union activism is less in privately funded colleges and universities? It appears that political activism of students is inversely proportional to the fees they pay. Or the political will of the local establishment is a factor in determining politicization. Autonomy from the state versus accountability to the state. This debate, if the institution is state-funded, there's a very fine line between the two and needs very mature handling from both sides to maintain the right balance. However, if the handling is not nuanced and mature, politicization, of course, may occur, or the institution may misuse public money. The instances of school textbooks being written and rewritten in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka clearly show we have not come to terms with our history. Or even the British, as it was mentioned earlier, they did not teach their colonial rule. A 13-year-old British kid was asked, what was the British Raj? And she answered, the chicken tikka place from down the corridor. I say something with a little knowledge. It's the social sciences that are more prone to the effect of politics and not so much the natural sciences. I guess it is difficult to politicize how plants harness sunlight, or how the planets move, or how the heart beats, or how the AC motor functions. Having said that, it is well known that the state discouraged the teaching of genetics and evolution in the United States at the insistence of some religious group. In spite of this attempt of the state, I should just point out that the highest number of path-breaking discoveries in genetics and evolution were made in the United States. It gave the highest number of Nobel laureates to this field. So what really influences education? I bring to you a comment from the US educational system by Stephen Krashen, who says, poverty is the issue. And this was touched upon in a different vein by my good friend Sharon. I mentioned politics of caste, community, and gender, which dictates the education any particular individual receives. I will not expand on the minorities and marginalized groups because there are many experts who know this better than me. Let me take you to upper middle class business communities and the subtle difference in the choices offered to the female child versus the male child. Of course, exceptions prove the rule. Today, and again, I come to what Sharon was pointing out, and I contradict you, Sharon, as always. There is a huge weapon in the hands of aspiring students. Doesn't matter about the numbers. You'd quote numbers much lower than the reality. There's a huge weapon in the hands of students, which is called the internet. This frees them from subversive influence, whether it's politics, financial, or familial. This weapon, I challenge any political system to defeat this weapon. And why do I say it so confidently? Because Sugata Mitro showed with his experiments of the hole in the wall to slum children that they could get all their learning without a teacher, without an institution, by looking at a computer through the hole in the wall. With the neo methods of self-organized learning, education will slip out of the hands of the state or corporate or any organized body that may influence what is taught. Information is already available in virtual environments from multiple sources. Examinations will be designed differently, as will scores, grades, and scholarship markers. I carefully say, in our ancient traditional knowledge of Mahabharata, mythical or historical or both, where Eklavya was denied Drona's teaching for political reasons, he still became his own teacher and was a threat to Arjuna. Indeed, Rabindranath Tagore's dream will be realized where the mind is without fear and the head is held high and where knowledge is free, so that neither politics nor poverty are inevitable influences, and anyway, I'd like to tell the House, nothing except death is inevitable.
Following the principal, the Vice-Chancellor Presidency, we have from Cambridge University, Thomas Simpson.
The contention on our side was always that politicization is inevitable. It might differ based on the place that it occurs and the time it occurs, but the reality that we face is that it will always occur. And that is why even in one of the world's oldest